I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. Okay, welcome everybody. So I ran into a friend I hadn't seen in a while, and she's an artist, a painter mostly. And she says that she listens to the podcast regularly, and that just warms my heart because that is the whole point of this, is for people in all different roles and jobs to listen and feel like they can learn something and understand what's going on in Seattle. So that was very cool. Her name's Rachel Tellian. She works over at Fair Isle Brewing, and her artwork is up in the brewery in the tap room. So you can go purchase it or just look around at it. I wanted to give her that shout out. So anyway, I am here today with Marjorie Thomas, the CFO of Allen Institute. Hello.
Hi, Rachel. It's good to be here with you.
It's good to be here. Yes, thank you. You're hosting me here at the Allen Institute. I love it here. It's beautiful. So thank you.
Well, thanks. We love it here too. It's a beautiful building and we've got a beautiful day going.
That's true. I think we met, a couple years ago. I asked you to speak on a panel, Women Who Lead in Finance. I think I just Googled women CFOs. I don't really know, but and then we kind of stayed in touch over the years. So I'm glad you volunteered to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. That was super fun. Met some really neat people.
Thinking about my mom, too. My mom was visiting.
Exactly.
I think you know me more than some of my friends do now. Oh, that's awesome. So a little bit about you. The Allen Institute, if you're not familiar, is a nonprofit in pursuit to understand the great mysteries of the brain. And it sounds like you now include researching cells and the immune system, right?
That's right. Okay. Yes.
And then you personally, you joined in 2017, and as Chief Financial Officer, you lead all accounting financial functions, including grant administration and more. Previously, you were the CFO and treasurer of RealNetworks, and before that, you held senior financial positions at Intuit, Sony Electronics, and Hewlett Packard. You served on the board for the Junior Achievement of Northern California. Yeah, I think that's what I pulled.
Yeah, that's right. And the one thing that I didn't include in my bio is I'm actually a board member of MoPop here in Seattle as well.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and I've been doing that for 5 years now, I think it is. Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Super fun.
So when I read this bio, there's a lot of financial background, obviously. Why did you get into that? Why are you passionate about the financial world?
Well, I love finance because, let's face it, money makes the world go round, right?
True. Yeah.
It's a language. It's usually the backdrop to, some of the greatest success stories, some of the greatest tragedies. As any of your favorite detectives will tell you, follow the money,
That's
right? So, that's one of the things that I love about finance, and particularly being able to be in spots like I have been, is you get to see the whole organization. You get to see how it runs, and in order to serve your organization well, you really have to understand how it operates. So those are the things that I have really loved about my career and being in finance.
I'm sure you get asked this a lot, but were you passionate about math when you were a kid, like going to college?
I was, yes.
I was too. Yeah, I love that. Well, cool. So we're doing 4 stories today because there's just so much to talk about, especially with one of them. And then here they are. First one is Seattle's minimum wage for tipped workers. There's a lot to discuss there. Number 2, the city of Seattle's budget is having some problems, so Marjorie's going to fix it. No, I'm just kidding. Number 3, the effect of caregiving in the workplace. And the last thing we'll talk about is kind of what's going on at the Allen Institute and some of their brain studies that they're doing. So here we go. Okay, the minimum wage. So there's a lot of headlines on this, I think, especially on social media. And I'm not even going to read the headline because I think it's not telling the whole story. And I'm actually really glad that this was chosen. One of our listeners recommended we dive into this. So 10 years ago, business and labor leaders negotiated a minimum wage, and they agreed to kind of separate it between businesses that are 500 or fewer employees and 500 or more. So those that were 500 and fewer and the employees are being tipped at that company, typically restaurants, right? They can have a lower minimum wage because they're going to count those tips into the wage. So when we're talking about specific numbers here, a minimum wage in Seattle is $19.97, so $20 for conversation purposes. If you are a small company that's tipping your employees, you can pay them $17.25. When they announced this, they said, that'll be for 10 years. We'll give you 10 years to figure out your situation, and eventually it's all going to go to the same price. Everyone's going to have to pay $20 an hour, basically. That is up in 2025. So that's why we're talking about it now. People are starting to freak out a little bit, and there's a new council member, Joy Hollingsworth. She represents Capitol Hill amongst other areas, but there's a lot of small restaurants in Capitol Hill. She comes to city council and is like, hey, whoa. let's slow this down. I don't think the restaurants are ready for this $3 increase per hour, which is a lot. And she introduces this bill and she gets a ton of pushback, which I'm kind of surprised by. But I think the pushback was, how dare you, not want to pay the employees? Because there's this narrative that the big, rich companies are not paying the poor workers. And there's just so much more nuance to the story. So, and I'm going to get your opinion on this, Marjorie, but there's like so much to recap. So that's part of it. So, and then she has to take the bill back. She rescinds this bill because she got so much pushback. She's like, okay, never mind. Like, good luck. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking she's saying. And I was able to chat with some people in the restaurant industry and get their take on it. But before we dive more into that, tell me what you think about this, especially from a financial perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is very nuanced, and talk about money, finance, basic economics, which, a lot of people really don't care about, right? Mm-hmm. And, you've really got three parties here that we're talking about. You've got the employee, you've got the worker. Hey, we all love workers, they work, they do things for us. You've got businesses, in this case, mainly small businesses. We love small businesses because they provide services for us that we want. But then you've also got the city, right. Just like this council member. And, for the city, they want services in their city. They want their city to be safe. They want their city to be vibrant. And plus, if all those things happen, if some people come in and spend money in the city, there's going to be a little revenue blow back to the city. And that's good because it allows them to provide services that we all want as well. So, nobody's evil here, despite what you hear in the rhetoric. But, I know myself. I've not been going to restaurants the way I used to pre-pandemic. And some of it is just the cost. I'm just kind of floored by the cost. And you make economic decisions every day. So, a city like Seattle that's trying to, get back to pre-pandemic levels, have some vibrancy, have some safety. You'd think that they want to do what they can to keep small businesses vibrant and alive here.
Yeah, definitely. I was able to get a hold of the CEO of Fire and Vine Hospitality, Chad McKay. He owns 8 restaurants, or his group owns 8 restaurants, most notably El Gaucho, all those locations in Heirloom. So we're talking high-end restaurants. Yeah. I have a clip from him. It's just a few minutes. So let's hear what he has to say about this.
I feel bad for the smaller restaurants because it is going to be a big adjustment and change. And it is a financial hit. And, the one thing that people need to keep in mind is Seattle is now officially, will be in January 1st, the most expensive restaurant city in the entire country. Wow. There is no other restaurant city for full service restaurants that costs more to dine in or for labor than the city of Seattle. Most of the general public doesn't really care about really the business models that are there. What they want is to make sure people are being paid at least minimum wage. And the total compensation model already guarantees them that they get paid at that minimum wage anyways. It's just whether tips are included or not.
Do you think we're getting to a place where it's just not, the math ain't mathin' anymore?
Oh, no, the math isn't math anymore. I mean, tip pooling is something that saved some of the restaurants for a long time, but it's getting untenable to be tipping out the back of the house and try to make up for the wages. We have not done that, but that's how a lot of the restaurants have kind of gotten through this for some time. But now this final hockey stick. We went to a service charge model, 7 years ago, 8 years for the entire company, but we started 8 years ago, and we left this as an issue behind. The interesting thing is we don't have a lot of discussions about people's pay across every industry. It just happens to be somehow restaurants seem to get an inordinate amount of attention. And unfortunately, the general public just really doesn't understand how full service restaurants and tipped employees really work. And so, there's not a campaign that's going to change that. So just know there are impacts. Businesses will survive. Some will be hurt and some will go out of business. The rest of them will survive because they're going to change, whether that's higher pricing, less days a week, getting rid of breakfast or lunch, getting rid of hours. they have to make a change. They can't continue to exist the way they are. And that you should give a little bit of grace to the small business owner when the city is imposing such a high regulatory cost.
Okay, so he's kind of talking about how Seattle already is a super expensive place to go out and eat.
Exactly. And I didn't realize that they were one of the most, or the most expensive. You know, you always think that New York is going to be that particular city.
So what do I mean, I don't know why I'm like so stuck in the employer's headset right now of like, if I'm a restaurant owner, what do? You can't increase your burger from, it's already the highest price burger, you know, you can't increase it too much. And then your other option is to cut costs, but like, what are you going to cut? And then it's not like I think what's kind of missing in this story is that a lot of these employees are already making the minimum wage when you account for the tips.
Right.
But is that even still enough to live in Seattle? Do you know what I mean? So I kind of feel like this is all, sadly, like a lose-lose situation.
It does feel like a lose-lose situation, which is really, really hard to hear and evaluate what is right. But you know, I just feel, you know, my own perspective is the city of Seattle is still trying to come back from the pandemic. It's trying to improve its vibrancy. And, you know, what do you do when, you know, half the people aren't coming to work on a daily basis like you used to? You know, obviously demand is going to be down, but we've already seen a lot of restaurants close. I don't think we want to see more restaurants close. So, you know, what can we do to keep the restaurants open? Are restaurants having difficulty finding workers? You know, if you allow basic economics to run its course in a market environment, then you would say that if employees are really that upset about what they're getting paid, they will go elsewhere and work elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was talking to one of my journalist friends, and he was, you know, he covers a lot of this stuff. He was saying what's kind of missing from this story is the conversation around the delivery drivers and their minimum wage. So we covered this in an earlier episode, but basically the people like Uber Eats, the companies like Uber Eats and DoorDash, the city has mandated that they pay their delivery drivers more. So they said, okay, sure, we'll do that, but we're just going to add a $5 fee to anybody that's ordering dinner, which I don't think was their intention. I think the city was like hoping that they would come out of their own pockets, but okay. So they've passed this along to the consumer, and now the consumer goes to order food from their favorite restaurant and isn't going to do it because it's too expensive.
Right.
So you've got restaurants that are now getting less people that are going out to eat, less people ordering from DoorDash, and now you've got a $3 increase in your minimum wage. So
yeah. And I don't think the city really thought through this, because if you think about a DoorDash's business model, it's highly variable. You know, they've got a set of fixed costs, but in terms of, you know, the volume of drivers they have, what they're paying their drivers, you know, including this $5, you know, uplift, it's, you know, it's like they have no incentive, absolutely no incentive to eat that $5 cost. And I think if the city of Seattle, if the council would have thought that through, they would have realized all this is going to do is reduce demand and maybe put a few more restaurants and maybe even a few more DoorDash drivers out of business.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and the whole argument of like they've had 10 years to figure this out. A lot of these restaurants weren't around 10 years ago, A. B, they didn't account for a pandemic that a lot of people are still recovering from, and C, the inflation. So I know I'm arguing heavily for the employer. I just want to make it clear that I also think that $20 an hour isn't a lot of money. And I know that it's really hard to live in Seattle with that. So I think my perspective is just like this. I don't know if the restaurant model, especially for small restaurants, I want to be specific, I don't know if that model works anymore from a budget standpoint.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, what you're going to see some of the larger restaurants do that can, you know, afford to pay for, you know, a different type of infrastructure is they're going to try and figure out ways that they can take more of the labor element out of what they serve.
Cool. Okay, moving on to our next story. We're sticking with the budget theme because, you know, our numbers girlies over here. Seattle's budget. So the city of Seattle has a budget of about $8 billion, but I've learned that about $2 billion is really what they can play with. The other stuff's really kind of locked up and
it's like utilities and, you know, electricity and trash service and all that kind of stuff, which is a little bit fee for service. But yeah, a lot of that money has to go to just literally keeping the lights on.
Yeah. So the article in the Seattle Times is basically saying, yeah, it's looking like there's a $7 million deficit in the budget, which will add to other deficits. So they're now $260 million in debt going to 2025. First of all, how does that even happen? How do you, don't you owe some people some things? From when you're looking at budgets, you can't just be in the red. 260 million.
Absolutely. You cannot be in the red. And so, there's, I don't want to call it games, but there's levers that you try to pull. One of them is, are there ways that I can generate more revenue? And, or can I hope that more revenue will be generated in the year coming up? And of course, I think one of the things that they're really hanging their hats on is the headcount, or the
payroll tax.
The payroll tax, yeah exactly. And a lot of people don't. They can see that. Yeah, there could be an increase there, but they don't think that it's really going to cover this whole budget gap. So then you need to do the hard work of really looking at what's going to go. What are we going to, dial back on? And it's a lot of services that are provided. A lot of them are essential. We've still got a situation where the police force is, down population-wise to... I think I read somewhere it's down to 1950 levels. So they've got a real issue that they're going to have to deal with here. But I think they are going to have to seriously look at what they're going to cut.
Yeah. So take us into the room of when you're discussing a budget for a company. You've been the CFO of multiple. Sometimes I feel like it's made up because sometimes I'll be at companies where they're like, we want 7% more in sales. Okay, go get it. But I'm sure there's more to it. So in that room, kind of what goes on? Have there been times where you really had to stand up and say no, we're cutting this or we're adding this? What is it like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the cuts because I think that's really more germane to what's going on with Seattle's budget right now. There's a number of ways that you can look at your budget. What we actually do here is really a zero-based budgeting approach, which a lot of people don't like because it takes more time, effort from the leaders of departments to do it. But I like it because it kind of forces on a yearly basis for you to look at what are you providing, what's working, what's not working.
So for the audience, what's the zero-based?
So zero-based budget basically means that instead of saying, hey, I want, inflation is 3.1%, therefore I want 3.1% more in my budget this next year, right? Or I have to add this headcount to do this new, this new service that we've liked. So I need to increase my budget by whatever that headcount is, instead of going back and saying, okay, well, we're going to do this, but are there ways that we can streamline other processes? Are there automations that we can put in that maybe could lower my cost and allow me to basically be more productive with the money that you're already allocated.
Right.
And that's really what zero-based budgeting is. It's kind of looking at your entire operation from ground up. How would you cost it?
Yeah. Do you feel like in the nonprofit world, there's a lot of but I really like this project or this event that doesn't make money or this whatever it is? And do you have to kind of be that voice in the room of saying...
Yeah,
killing your darlings. That's something terrible. Some terrible.
I know it really is. And what I have found being in the world of basic research is that a lot of times, the findings that can come out of basic research can take years and years. So there's always that argument that we are right at the cusp of really, discovering something great. Marge, you can't rip the rug out from under us right now. And, very impassioned, very, and they could very well be, so my approach is always to say, well, how can we do it more productively? How can we do it more efficiently then? And do you have to go full on with everything you've proposed here, or could we pilot something? Could we outsource something? So really trying to get people to think creatively. One of the things that we've been working on here at the Institute is just, the concept of being a creative institute. And we are a highly creative institute, but, sometimes when there are some hurdles or barriers that you come across in your day-to-day life, sometimes that's when the real creativity can kick in. And I think any of us who have wanted to do something, taken a trip, didn't quite have enough money, whatever it is, we've seen those creative juices kick in, right? That's
true. Yeah, I picked up trash at a festival one time to be able to afford a plane ticket to my sister's wedding. I actually don't think I told her that. I fully get that. So I was going to say what's one of the most frustrating parts of being a CFO, but if you want to be positive, you can say what's one of the more rewarding things. But my question was, what's like a frustrating part of being a CFO in a company?
Well, I think one of the most rewarding parts of being a CFO is to really help enable the success of your organization.
Yeah.
And, it's really fun when enabling the success is you can grow something, you can start something. Everybody loves that part, right?
That's true.
The difficult part is when you feel like enabling your organization's success means we've got to stop doing some things, because it has real implication. It usually means that you've got to let some people go. Mm-hmm. You've got to say to folks that, do feel like they may be on the cusp of something that we just can't afford to continue to do.
That's
this
so hard for you.
Yeah, it is very hard. And I don't, personally, I don't think you ever get used to it. And I don't think you ever do really want to get used to it. You got to remember the implications of, what your decisions
it's a good thing that you're
are.
not just like, I don't know, lay them off. Who cares?
Yeah.
That's a good thing. Okay, we're going to move on, unless there's something else you wanted to say about the city's budget.
No, I wish the city council, I wish the mayor good luck.
Yeah, you don't want to be their CFO.
I know today.
That would be a big budget to look through. Okay, so our next story, you actually brought this up to me, and I'm really glad you did, and it was this conversation around caregiving and also having a job. So we have a big portion of our population that is caring for both their children and now also caring for the parents.
The sandwich generation, right?
That's what it's called, yes. But you also got people that don't have kids and are still caring for the parents. So I think what we're going to focus on today is mostly the caring for the parents part, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, I was kind of geeking out on some statistics, just about the U.S. population. And, as everybody hears, the population growth is slowing. But did you know that 1 in 4 Americans are now over the age of 50,
Whoa.
And it has never been that high of a percentage before. And then if you look at the growth of the population of those that are 85 and over, it's like 35%, in the last, I can't remember how many years, but not very many years.
Wow.
And I think we can all say, I know of someone whose grandma or grandpa are over 100, mm-hmm. And back when I was a kid, that was unheard of, right? Yeah. So, we are dealing with an aging population. And, as a leader in an organization, and I've got directors, who are leaders of their own organization. So, these are people that have had fulsome careers, they tend to have teenage or kids in college, and they have aging parents as well. Mm-hmm. And, the good news is they've lived to ripe old ages. But I remember in my own situation when my mom and dad were still alive. My mother, she actually, had some mild dementia, and she was aware enough to know she did have dementia. Mm. My father had a stroke, so he didn't have great, physical movement. And she used to say to me, Marge, between the two of us, we make one good whole person. And
I love that.
And they did,
Yeah.
and it worked until one of them wasn't there anymore.
Right.
But, it was interesting because I was having a staff meeting. This was about a year ago. And every single person on my staff had a caregiving thing, that was, it was concerning to them. It was taking a lot of their, of their mind space, thinking about what the solution is going to be. And then, unfortunately, weirdly enough, in July, 3 of my direct reports had a parent or grandparent or an uncle die.
Oh,
and, it was, with the parent situation, it was... Now, it was a little bit like my mom and dad, where, the mom was starting to suffer from dementia, couldn't really live by herself. And so the whole, scurry of what am I going to do with mom? It took a lot of her time and attention to be able to do that. Another situation where a grandparent died, there was a relative, a cousin, who couldn't live by themselves and was living with grandma. Now, where does that cousin live? When, she had a reverse mortgage on her home. And so the home actually has to be sold. And I think what we're realizing just in our society, and part of this is economic and part of this is just the pace of life these days. Things work until they don't. And once they don't, then you really have to drop everything and figure out what the solution is going to be.
Yeah.
So I decided that we should start a caregiving affinity group here at the Allen Institute.
Wow.
So this has been kind of in the works now. We've been meeting for about 5 months, and I think we've got about 40 folks now who kind of come in and out
and
of
the
caregiving.
Heard of that kind of, so an affinity group, I think most people know, but it's like a LGBTQ group at a company or...
or maybe Asian American.
Heritage, So have you heard of other companies having this particular
I haven't, so I don't know if we're unique or other people do it, but I'm really excited that the Allen Institute, agreed that this was something worthwhile. And I mean, the amount of stuff that I have learned from folks, the things that you don't think about, like, okay, power of attorney for, your father, or, if something happens to one of them and the other one has to go into an assisted living facility or something. And so many parents and children, they just don't talk about it until the crisis happens. I think what we're all learning and really trying to advocate is, if you're a parent, get your will, talk to your kids, even if it's going to be a painful experience and you're going to have to say, sorry, Marge, Dan is going to be our executor, right? Mm-hmm. Do it, so at least your children know who's going to be in charge, what's going to happen. And I'd say to kids, talk to your parents again, even if they don't want to talk about it. Explain to them that this would be an act of love, to think about it and, provide some planning before it is inevitably going to happen.
Right. Yeah. So there's a Forbes article that kind of talks about this, and, it makes sense because it's not just a social issue. I think this is also a business and organizational issue because you're seeing people, like you said, they're distracted. There's mental health issues. And oftentimes some of these stats is that a lot of people end up quitting their job, or they're not as productive, or they have to go down to part-time. And so this is affecting both employers and employees. So the article kind of cites a couple things that employers can do, removing the stigma, talking about it, assuring them that they still have their job. But from you, besides the affinity group, do you have any other advice for businesses that want to kind of do better by their employees because of this?
Yeah. Well, the neat thing is there are actually some benefit providers that are emerging around the country that will actually come in and provide this type of benefit for employees. So we're actually looking at that right now at the Allen Institute. We haven't pulled the trigger on it yet, but they'll do everything from there's actually even some of them even have apps where you can put all your person's medical information in there. You can put all their doctor's appointments. So if you happen to have a helper, maybe it's a neighbor or a sister or brother who you kind of share this responsibility with, you can all kind of come to one place to get all the information that you need, know when the appointments are going to happen. And they do everything from, medical type assistance. It's not really a nurse or a doctor, but it's helping you with the process of attorney, looking for other caregiving options. And they, a lot of this is really geared to the elderly, but they will also look at, things that you might need for, children in general or children with special needs. Yeah, there's a lot of services out there, but it's, when you're in a crisis, it's really hard to research and know where to turn.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you started that group, and I hope it continues to do well, and I hope other companies hear this and start a group at their business. So, okay, our last story, we're going to end on a nice high note, I think, but there's a story about Allen Institute. A little hard for me to kind of wrap my head around it, but what I think it is that this thing called Open Scope program, which is neuroscientists from around the world can present an idea that they want to research, and then they choose one, and then Allen Institute does it.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes, that's true. That is true.
So were you involved at all in this project? I guess you probably approved the expense for it.
Yes, absolutely. And this has actually been going on for a while. And just a little background. So, Rachel, as you said, Allen Institute, founded by Paul G. Allen, co-founder of Microsoft. And we just turned 20.
Oh, congrats.
So
happy birthday.
We're almost drinking age.
Oh, almost.
Yeah. And, a little bit like, a young person, we're very passionate about what we do. We've got big aspirations. Yeah. We're a little gangly.
Yeah.
We've been growing like gangbusters. But, so not all of our processes work perfectly, but
sure.
we're working on that. But, one of the things that Paul wanted to do when he developed the Institute is he wanted to do research differently than maybe a traditional research lab in an academic institute. And so, he wanted to tackle big problems, that would really take larger organizations to tackle. He wanted to bring multi-disciplines to bear on the particular subject. So, not only is it going to be, a number of different, biologists and scientific, disciplines coming together, but also technology as well. And then, he also wanted to make sure that everything that we did was open, that it was open to other scientists, because he felt like that was the best way to really accelerate science. So that's very different from a lot of institutes,
Yeah, we had a whole episode on NanoString and the lawsuit because it's not as open because 10x sued them, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, that's not common in every biotech
Exactly.
space.
Yeah. So OpenScope is a, perfect example of really trying to do that. And in this case, it's really trying to understand what's going on in a mouse brain. We do use mice in our research because we study the brain, and it's really hard to open up, the skull of a human and study their brain. So we bless, the mice who have given their lives to research. They have a very, very good life here. But OpenScope is a great example of how we, have put together a large platform that really allows people to do some real precision science and get a level of accuracy that is hard to do if you're in a lab. So first of all, this equipment is very expensive, so not all scientists can afford this type of, equipment. Second of all, you need a wet lab, to do this type of stuff. If you can actually come in and use our equipment or, direct us in terms of what you want us to do with the equipment, that just opens up the, area of science. It really helps democratize, science to a lot of people that
I'm all for it.
Have the intelligence.
But speaking of these research projects, is there anything that the general public can understand that Allen Institute has discovered or figured out? Have you figured out why we dream what we dream? I don't know, whatever the brain stuff is.
Yeah. Well, what we really are working on is kind of basic science, so that, again, we can really help accelerate the scientific findings of the entire world, if you will. So brain science, which is our oldest institute, they started with the idea that they would map and categorize every neuron in the brain. And the human brain has something like 80 to 100 billion neurons in it.
Okay.
But I know, and that's just a mind-boggling number, right? No pun intended. What they've been able to do, over the years is they've been able to categorize these neurons down to roughly 3,000 categories. Oh. That's still a big number, but in order to be able to describe neurons in such a way that you can kind of fit them into boxes that are a little more accessible to us, to understand, etc., and, who they're talking to, and, what genes are turning on or off at different times. This really helps then other scientists be able to take that information and use it in a much more precise way. So that's a lot of what we try to do. We're also trying to do that with immunology, where writ large, we're trying to understand what does a healthy immune system look like, and then what does unhealthy look like, and what are the triggers that trigger, the change, from healthy to either hyperimmune or hypoimmune. We've been working on arthritis, and we're actually able to, see a trigger through analyzing blood samples, that basically was triggering when someone was going from pre-rheumatoid arthritis to having rheumatoid arthritis. So these are the types of discoveries that can really then help pharma, biotech, scientists understand, hey, how do we take this information? Can it be used to help us with a cure?
Sounds like Allen Institute's doing a lot of really cool stuff. We're at time, but I wanted to give you, I'm trying to wrap up with a different question. I'm going to go with kind of what's the best piece of advice you received, and or do you have your own advice for the audience?
Wow.
I know. Well, personal or professional.
Gosh, I think some of the best advice that I've received, outside of just, what it takes to, technically kind of do your role, is how to develop and mentor your people. And for me, at the stage I am at my career, this is really one of the most satisfying parts about my job is, to see how folks kind of unfold in their own organization, and how to really help them thrive in their organization. Sometimes with folks, they're so passionate about what they want to do, you just set them free, Other times people have blocks, and that can be one of the most interesting things. And maybe that's what I love about being in a science organization. It's like, okay, why the block? What's going on? Is there a way to sort of alleviate that? So I think, being a bit of a scientist, being willing to experiment, have theories, prove them or disprove them and move on, is an important part of just being a successful citizen.
I love it. Well, thank you again for hosting, and thank you for taking the time and studying all the articles. I really appreciate it. It's really good to see you. Thanks, Marge.
Likewise. Thanks, Rachel. This was fun.
This has been The Weekly, with production assistance from Nick Patry. If you liked what you heard, rate us and write a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at info@theweeklyseattle.com. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We'll see you next time.